Hello everyone, my name is Kaylee. I'll be your host for the evening or for the afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 Iowa City Book Festival presented by the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. That's a mouthful. We would like to thank the sponsors that made this event possible. The City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa City Public Library, that's where you are right now, congratulations, Prairie Lights, Iowa Public Radio, the Graduate Hotel, and Think Iowa City. Between events, be sure to visit the book fair at Merge, which is right next door around all the construction in the Ped Mall. There you can visit with publishers and authors. The vast majority of book festival events are offered without charge, but they are not free. Your financial support gives us the ability to offer programs like this festival. Please consider donating to the City of Literature by visiting iowicitybookfestival.org and clicking on support, or you can scan the QR code on the back of your festival program. If you need to use the bathrooms are down that hall out into the main area, and then if you just take a right, they'll be right on your right, as well as a water fountain. Today we'll hear from author Elizabeth Crane. Elizabeth Crane is the author of 6 works of fiction, most recently the novel The History of Great Things and the story collection Turf. She is a recipient of the Chicago Public Library Foundation 21st Century Award. Congratulations. Her work has been featured on NPR's Selected Shorts and adapted for the stage by Chicago's Steppenwolf Theater. Congratulations again. Wow. Her novel, We Only Know So Much, has been adapted for film. Oh my goodness. She teaches in the Low Residency Master's Program at UC Riverside Palm Desert. She lives in upstate New York. Today she will discuss her new memoir, All of This Will Change. We'll also get to a Q&A section. I ask that whenever we do so, you speak into this microphone because this session is recorded. If you don't speak in the microphone, people won't be able to hear. So I do ask that you speak nice and loud into this microphone that I'll bring around for the Q&A section. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Crane.
Thank you, Kaylee. This is the one for me to talk into, though, correct? Yeah. Hi, thanks for coming, Iowa. So I'm going to read, I don't know, we'll see when the moment seems to be over, but I'm going to read a little bit just to tell you a little bit about this before we get started. It is a memoir about the sudden demise of my marriage. It is my first memoir. I like you heard, I do primarily write fiction, and someone might ask me about this, but I was not planning on writing this book. I basically wanted to write. I was sort of, it was like 6 months after my marriage ended, and I was very sad, and I thought, well, writing always makes me feel a little better, but the things that I had in mind to write about, I couldn't really focus on because all I could think about was what happened to my marriage. It was very sudden, and I just didn't know what happened. So I started writing this, and it didn't come out as poorly as I thought it might because I had written 2 previous drafts of memoirs about different subjects that were shelved. So here we are. So I'm going to read a couple of little things from throughout the book, and hopefully it will be pretty self-explanatory. This is the very beginning. Forever. Once upon a time in 2004, a woman and a man were married in a backyard ceremony on a glorious September Saturday on the west side of Chicago, handmade streamers in the trees, friends and family present to bear witness. They were happy and in love, and people knew they were happy and in love. If anyone thought, oh, this is a terrible idea, they forever held their peace. Many of them spoke as the Spirit moved them to share why they celebrated this love. And the celebration seemed genuine, and the couple was like, these people all get it. Cool, we knew it. This marriage really is a good idea. But who knows, maybe someone did hold their peace. Maybe they could ask. They would have to ask everyone. They've lost touch with some of them, sometimes on purpose, which is not a thing you want to have to say about people who are at your wedding. What if someone held their peace and then they died? What if they got in touch with everyone who had been in attendance and every one of them said, no, we didn't hold our peace, we were psyched for you. But it was one or all of the people who died or lost touch who had held their peace. This wedding was 15 years ago. Several people in attendance have died. Her dad died. The woman was so sure her dad loved her husband. But what if he was just happy that she was happy and just crossed his fingers and hoped for the best? Or what if people lied about holding their peace and said to their faces, we were not holding our peaces? And or what if everyone was just going along with this obviously doomed union? Because let's face it, love isn't always enough. And maybe more than one person who died had extensive notes on why they thought this marriage was doomed but held their peace, because they knew people did what they wanted, but then everyone died always having held their peace, leaving the couple to never know what they really thought and or, moreover, maybe possibly in some universe, changing the course of the couple's history, if they'd listened. And they were like, you're right, love isn't enough. And they walked away and had lives that were better in ways they couldn't have imagined then, since everything seemed so great at the time. But instead, they went ahead and got married because they didn't know there were all these unspoken predictors of doom. If everyone held their peace and then they died with all their pieces, how would the couple ever know? We were there. We doubt either of them would have listened. So that's that. Okay, let's see where we're going here. Mark, can you hold your questions till after?
It's not a question. It's a statement. I held my peace.
You held your...
Oh.
Okay. Okay. I'm not flustered now. Easy. Once upon a time, before the husband came along, a woman was dating younger men, not even remotely on purpose. There were just more of them who seemed to be available. It was fine. She could only go so much younger at this point because she herself was young. Let's say it started when she was about 27 or 28. There might still have been a scrunchie in her hair. She might still have been listening to Terence Trent D'Arby on her Walkman. And let's be clear, it was never inappropriate. In the early days of dating younger, it was never more than a few years. And one more thing. Her fictional dream man has always been her exact same age, has her exact same pop culture references, like James at 15 or England Dan and John Ford Coley. There was one guy when she was around 30 who was way older, which was not an improvement, was a massive overcorrection age-wise. But this guy was wrong for her in ways that had little to do with how old he was. Then more younger guys after that, but again, only by a few years, that kind of age difference where 20 years later you realize you were always the same age. Sadly, as time went on, most of the men she met were somehow not getting older. They seemed to be getting 5 to 10 years younger, and she did not see this as a plus. They were cute and interesting, but generally had roommates and ate a lot of ramen before the upscale ramen restaurant thing happened, just 4 for $1 ramen, served in mismatched cereal bowls. And this kind of dating went on for a couple years, nothing too serious, obviously, if the word obviously even needs to be added. And then in an even more unfortunate turn, before this period of her life had passed, the term cougar came into popularity. And right about there, she met the man who would become her husband, and she was 41 and he was 28, and the age difference was neither unnoticed nor unconsidered, but was ultimately put aside in favor of taking it one day at a time. Between them, at that time, they had one living parent. They knew loss. And they knew that they didn't know what was ahead in terms of who'd go first, because nobody gets to know that, and they were in love. They got along. It was easy. They got married. That was easy too. It was all easy, always. Okay, this is called needs. I need you to know that I loved him. I need you to know why I loved him. I need you to know all of the reasons I loved him. I need me to know why I loved him. I need you to know that I stayed for 15 years for a reason. I need to know that there is a reason. I need to know what the reason is. I need to show you all the beautiful moments. I don't want to bore you with happy tales. I don't want to create unhappy tales. I don't want to only tell sad tales. I don't want to make him into the bad guy. I don't want to be the bad guy. I don't want there to be any bad guy. I need to do the math of my marriage, and I need for it to add up to something that makes sense. Perhaps I need a ledger. I need for the good column to be longer than the bad. I need to see the marriage totals in front of me. I need for there to be accounting. I need to believe the people who tell me I didn't waste 15 years, that endings and failures aren't the same thing. So this, a lot of this was written sort of close to in real time. I was just figuring out what had gone wrong, because we didn't really get along quite well and had a lot of good times. And, midlife crises happen. What can I say? Okay, so this is... they got a dog. Once they brought the dog home, sometimes it seemed to the wife like the affection got redistributed in such a way that the dog actually got some of what each partner had previously allotted to the other, versus there's enough love to go around. There's enough love to go around, isn't there? They got a king-size bed. Was this it? Was this it, the beginning of the end? They were living in Texas and they needed a new mattress, and the idea was that the queen had been a bit crowded with her, him, he's tall, and sometimes their 80-pound dog. So they got a king, but the dog still found ways to make it crowded, and her husband was now literally farther away. They got an L-shaped sofa. Maybe it was this. Was it this? They got an L-shaped sofa and they sat on different sides of it. He stretched out on the side that you're supposed to stretch out on, and she stretched out on the other side. Her husband was now literally farther away in 2 rooms of the house. They moved upstate. The number of breakups of couples who moved to their town in the last 5 years seems notable. Does this mean something? Does it mean they'd be together if they hadn't moved there? Or does it mean they had to move there so that they wouldn't be together because they weren't supposed to be together but didn't know it yet? Couldn't they have not been together somewhere more conveniently located without moving? They watched a show called Divorce on the L-shaped sofa. She had to remind herself that she wasn't superstitious. At some juncture of stepping over cracks and not opening umbrellas indoors, she stopped to realize she had never believed in superstitions. Her mother's back did not break. Her mother died of cancer, and she was pretty sure there was no corresponding superstition for that. But she had killed a character based on her dad in one of her novels, and then he died, and she wrote about infidelity in that same novel, which obviously killed her marriage as well. So she continued to carry on some ill-considered ideas about the power of her thoughts to create realities. That dad thing we mentioned above fucked her up a bit. For the duration of her marriage, she avoided singing heartbreak songs, too, as though this would somehow manifest actual heartbreak. Anyway, they went ahead and watched a show called Divorce on their L-shaped sofa, and she thinks now maybe that was all too much. Should they just have gone ahead and gotten one of those long-ass dining room tables, too? And sat at opposite ends like elderly married royals in a movie who quietly loathe one another and be done with it? Okay, so let's jump ahead. While we're here, 10 scenarios that might have been preferable. And this is dedicated to my dad, who kept a list of the top 10 ways he was going to die. 1, the wife is stricken with a terrible fatal illness while they're still in couples therapy. He stays with her out of guilt, and she's fine with that. Eventually, he realizes what a heinous mistake he was about to make and spends the rest of her living days atoning by reading to her, washing her hair, and bearing gifts of fine jewelry. 2, the husband falls from a second-floor window at the client's house while he's still in couples therapy with the wife, who outfits the home with a ramp and one of those chairlifts that runs up the stairs, and when he returns home from the hospital, she cares for him for the rest of his living days. He realizes how lucky he was to have her all those years and spends the rest of his living days expressing his gratitude. 3, the wife, still conscious on her deathbed after falling down in front of a car years before the horrible client comes into the picture. There was another person that was semi in the picture. Years before they ever go to couples therapy, tells her husband not to cry, that even though she had a short life, she had everything she ever wanted, and she coughs an operatic cough and dabs her head with a lacy handkerchief and expires. 4, returning from couples therapy round 3, when they finally made a breakthrough, pledging their renewed love, they both die in a car accident because the husband is tailgating and there's a tailgater behind them, and the car in front of them slows down and there's a pileup. The client shows up at the funeral, and the wife's friends stop her at the door and say, "Yep, no, bye." And then everyone says nice things about how much they loved both of them and how right they were for each other, even though the husband went on a stupid walkabout. 5, a year after separating, the wife slips into some morbid reflection and writes it down, and one of these grim scenarios actually happens because that's the superpower she's burdened with, and she has to live with it on Earth or in eternity, depending on which way it goes. 6, decades after separating and never getting divorced, the husband and wife tentatively and tenderly reunite, only to learn that the husband has a horrible and deadly pulmonary disease from years of working around chemicals. "Everything good in my life was because of you," he says. "I'm glad you know that now," she says. 7, decades after separating and never getting divorced, the husband and wife die separately but meet up in eternity. The husband spends a few eternities trying to make amends, and a few eternities after that, and the wife finds forgiveness, and they spend all the eternities after that together. 8, decades after separating and never getting divorced, the husband and wife die separately but meet up in eternity, and in eternity there is no language and no form, only blissful, wordless understanding and love of the human condition. There's no such thing as sorry in eternity. There are no mistakes or regrets in eternity, zero self-loathing or grief. There's only what is, and what is good and right and perfect, which means there are infinite puppies. 9, the client was never born. No one else was ever born who either of them found attractive during their 50 years of marriage, and they die peacefully in their sleep holding hands. 10, the husband and wife were never born, and no one's heart ever hurt. Let's see, so I'll give you like one or two little shorties. So there is a little turn of events where I went to spend a year basically in New York City because my town where I live is very small, and I just couldn't face running into my husband or anyone who knew my husband, which just seemed like everyone. And so I went to the city so I could spend time with friends and not have to worry about that. And sort of an unexpected last third of the book. Pilot. From there, she lands in the city, back in the fancy couple's East Village pied-à-terre. Those are friends who loaned me their apartment. As you know, in a sitcom, this sweet and probably large apartment, soon to be nicknamed the mansion by the teenage members of the cast, would never be explained, but this is real life. It's an apartment this 50-something creative writing professor could never afford, but in this show it gets explained, and things begin to turn around, at least to the extent that it offers her an extended break in which she won't run into the husband, and she can see friends every day and go to meetings every day, all day, if she wants. She brings one suitcase and her laptop and the dog, and this is where the sitcom-y turn of events takes place. Her old buddy, the single dad, the one from the Woodstock trip, along with his teenage daughter, moves back to the city after 20 years in L.A. Buddy needs a place to crash for a week or two while apartment hunting, stays with new divorcee-to-be, never leaves, says it's no coincidence that they ended up in New York at the same time. Divorcee-to-be stares directly into the camera. Divorcee-to-be cries on single dad's shoulder. Single dad holds her hand and makes her laugh. Teenage daughter and her friends burst through the door without keys. Quirky makeshift family and comedy ensue. Let's see, what's a good little wrap up here? Well, I don't want to spoil it too much, so. All right, I'll just read this last, these last, very, very short. Lady's choice. Maybe it was her choice to end the marriage. He said the words, he said, I want to end the marriage, after she rejected the only other option presented of trying an open marriage. She did not want an open marriage. She is happy for any people who choose an open marriage. Her choices became no marriage or open marriage. She chose no marriage. Sometimes choices don't include Keanu Reeves in a private island in the Caribbean as a third option. She had two imperfect options here and chose the one that worked best for her. In some previous version of herself, she very well might have settled for an option that didn't work for her. In this one, she didn't. Literally. Sometimes my heart literally hurts. I'm using that word the right way. I think I'll leave it there. So, thank you.
All right. Is this on? Okay. So we have time for a few questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll come around to you.
Where does it stand now?
Can we focus the questions on the book or the writing?
Oh, what's it like now?
What's what like now?
Your psychology about the whole affair.
Again, book, writing. I probably wouldn't talk to anybody else in this room with this. This is family members. We're going to talk at lunch. Maybe we'll talk about that at lunch. Book, writing, related questions.
Okay, then. I've got two here. I'll come up with a question.
I enjoyed your style, but I wondered why sometimes it was other people and sometimes it was you.
Great question. And there's actually, it's a funny thing, because memoir, one would generally think of writing in first person. I come from fiction, and so I write in whatever person seems to fit the material best. And as I was writing this, I switch around. Sometimes it's first. There's not a lot of first person in the book, but there's a lot of mostly third and some second. It really. It came down to just kind of the way it sounded, and if it was in first, I might have changed it to second because it sort of seemed more engaging to read that way. I think sometimes people will ask that question, and it's like, well, did it create a distance emotionally for you to be able to do it that way? But it was really, I played around with it a lot until I felt like each particular piece was working.
I had a comment. This is just a comment. I was hoping you wouldn't stop.
Oh,
It's very engaging.
thank you.
I think you wrote a story about Dave one time.
I wrote a story called The Daves. Yes,
That's
I
it.
did.
That was hilarious. I wondered, a lot of magazines these days advertise for the humor issue. And I wonder how you respond to that, since your stories are often very funny, very biting, very satirical, and how somehow this has gotten split off from mainstream fiction and memoir and so on.
Interesting. I don't. That is interesting. I mean, that could be a long conversation about genre, really. Humor certainly is a go-to for me. I mean, this was not a happy time in my life, but humor still it's kind of how my brain works. But it's definitely a mix of sad and funny, and I think that most of the literature that I enjoy has both. I don't really have any answer to why publishing or any place else would separate that out, except for my sort of vague theory that people like to put things in categories, and I'm coming more and more to try. I think especially with I've done some not all, but a lot of autobiographical fiction in the past. And it's funny because I wrote a memoir. I'm not a memoir. I wrote a book based on me and my mom, one of my novels, and. But the concept is clearly fantastical because me and the mom are dead. No, she's dead. I'm not dead. She's dead. And we're talking, and then we're each kind of recreating scenes from the other person's life that are made up, based on sort of a general timeline of actual facts. So it gets fantastical, and it's just like there's no way you don't know that these things didn't happen. But I've had people call that my memoir, and I'm like, yeah, okay. And part of the reason I called this story will change is because it is a story. It's just my story. Not only do I not know what the story is that my ex would tell about it, although he's read it and didn't have much to dispute and was very generous. I don't know. I just think a lot of the literature that interests me most kind of crosses genres, and I don't have an answer to that question, but.
Well, I liked your section about holding your peace, keeping your peace, because I think that really does happen. People,
Apparently.
yeah. I know it happens, but yeah. So did you find that when you were finished with the book, that it helped you through that passage of becoming single again?
At least to the extent that I was creating something. I don't don't know that, I mean, probably because I don't know if I came up with any concrete answers as to why my marriage ended. I think it is a lot about my ex, but in the course of the, writing, it was really important to me to kind of look at my own participation in the marriage, just because he was the one that decided, like, yes, there were a lot of things emotionally going on with him that had nothing to do with me. But I am inclined as a human to want to look at my part in things, not take more responsibility than is mine, but just to, so I have one of my writer friends, I always think, like, who writes memoirs, she says, you don't get to be the hero of your own story. And I appreciate that, because it's not an eat, pray, love. There's no, like, triumph. There's just kind of like, it's just kind of a realistic portrait of a woman kind of trying to figure out what went wrong when there wasn't any kind of drama. Now I've gone far, far away from the question.
So, though, do you think that you're okay now in your new place where you find yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, so my question is about how you decided to go ahead and publish this one, because I've written some memoirs and stuff, and I get through them, and I'm like, okay, it wasn't as good as I thought, or it wasn't as, it just didn't feel that necessary to go through with publishing a short story or whatever my memoir stuff was. And how did you decide to go about or to continue on and publish it?
Yeah, I mean, as I was writing it, I had these roommates, so I was reading some of it out loud to them, and they seemed to be enjoying it, so that was encouraging. And I have a sense of, I never think like, oh, I'm really, really good, ever, but I know when I feel good enough about something to submit it versus like, no, this is just not working. But because this was a new kind of form to me, I also did a reading fairly early on, and I brought my last collection of stories with me and then some printed out excerpts from this. And I was really scared to read it, which is why I brought the stories as a backup in case I changed my mind last time. And I read it out loud, and the response was really incredible. And I like as good as any reading I've ever given. So I was like, okay, that's good. That noted,
So when you shifted from writing it for yourself to perhaps writing it for an audience, I mean, did you note a change in your writing or how you approached your writing?
Not really. That's a funny thing, because I teach, as Kaylee mentioned, and because I've been writing since I was a kid, I still have this kind of mental thing, and I didn't publish my first book till I was 40, and so I still have this kind of mental thing where I think like nobody's ever going to read this, and that really helps me, because I just kind of feel like I'm just going to entertain myself here, and maybe in the course of that it will entertain someone else, and also it frees me up not to worry about content, until after the fact, which is something I tell my students a lot, like there are a lot of things to consider when you write, especially when you're writing memoir, but, sometimes there's this conversation around how to write for your audience. I have a really hard time guessing who's going to read my stuff. They say like, oh, women read more, or blah, 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 whatever. But I don't have a real sense of that. And so I don't even try to guess who the audience is. And someone vaguely like me, but that's like limiting. And so I hope that there'll be people like totally not like me that that read it. But I do like to tell my students, like, you know, don't worry about your audience, you know, at first, you know, write what interests you, what you're moved to write, and then we'll get that somewhere that, you know, the world might like to see as well.
Any other questions?
This person is raising their hand very quietly up here.
I'm just interested to know how you shifted to movie writing.
Oh, was anybody here? Was anyone at that late night thing? Were you there? Do you want to tell the story? Just kidding. You know, I had, as you may or may not know, when I was in my 20s, I was writing a lot of screenplay or sitcom kind of things. That I really kind of thought that that's the direction that I was going to go in, and I worked on that TV show in '95, and ended up becoming very good friends with my boss. He was writer, producer, actor on the show. And I gave him a pilot that I had written, which we, to this day, kind of joke that he put it in his briefcase and never read it. And it's still in his briefcase. But he, you know, we stayed friends, and he approached me about, you know, after that experience in the TV, I should say, like, I was like, I don't want to work in this. Like, it was the set was fraught, and I didn't want to live in California, and I was just like, I'm gonna write short stories for a living, and but he approached me about, you know, I hoped I maybe would write a screenplay at some point again, but he approached me about like adapting my first novel, and said, do you want to do this together? And I said, sure, and that was how that came to be.
Your writing reminds me of Elizabeth Strout. I'm wondering if you read Elizabeth Strout and if she had an influence on you.
No, I've read her after, you know, after the fact, but not, I wouldn't say, I would not call her an influence particularly. Well, in the early days, when I started writing short stories, I think I was very inspired by Lydia Davis and Laurie Moore and George Saunders and David Foster Wallace, for better or worse. And like anybody that was doing stuff that was really kind of out of the box was getting me very excited to play with words.
Short stories,
yeah,
mostly.
Yeah. Oh my God! That's right. That's right.
That can't happen today, thank goodness.
I really should use that story more often.
Yeah,
anybody pregnant here?
Would love to hang out, but I'm gonna go have a baby. So I wanted to ask you, kind of along the lines of what you're saying about feeling fear your first reading. What has it been like post-publication nonfiction compared to fiction for readings or for your experience of the book getting out there, where it's like your actual story?
It's definitely different because there is a kind of, you know, I have I mean, I speak to my particular experience because it does feel different when I have done my very best to write what is true to my memory. And the title alone suggests that my memory is not perfect. And no one's is, obviously, but I come across some evidence during the course of the book that from journals of mine, I was like, oh, I had this very clear memory of something that my husband said that he didn't say. And so that changes the story at that point in the book. But because these are real portrayals of real people, I do want to be thoughtful about the conversation. You know, I I care about my ex. We are friends. And I didn't want to write a book called My Husband's an Asshole, like he's not. He's a guy who went through stuff and, so did I. So, I feel kind of, and also like when you get into like, I can be a little bit of an open book, but it's a little dodgy to like get too personal about, non-writing related aspects of that, So I have to kind of keep myself in check because I'll I'll tell you anything afterwards, but if like things are recorded, like blah, blah, blah. And so, it's definitely different. But I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about it to me too is that people connect with it, and I'm getting messages from people who have been through it or relate to it, and and that's super meaningful. So that definitely makes up for some of the awkwardness,
Well, that answers my question.
What future literary projects are on your artistic horizon?
Well, I wrote a pilot with my screenwriting partner. We're doing our best to get that out there. I have sort of half a collection of stories I'd like to finish. And I'd like to write some more nonfiction. We'll see what happens.
A pilot for what?
A TV show.
What TV show?
My TV show. Original, up from the ground up, as whatever.
I don't know if you already addressed it, but what was the point you realized this would be nonfiction rather than autobiographical fiction? I mean, was there a point where you said, oh, this is actually how this needs to be?
Yeah, I think I knew that as like while I was writing it. There was a discussion with my publisher about possibly calling it a novel, and I was open to it, but not super open to it because I wanted to try this form, and while I was writing it, I was making a much greater effort to stick to facts, quote, than I usually am, because that's one of the reasons I like fiction, is because I can take real stuff and then totally make stuff up. That's fun. And this was fun, not fun. My marriage was failing, but it was definitely just kind of a different. It was important to me that it was called memoir and that it stuck true to that form, and so I ultimately fought to keep it as a memoir, and I didn't get too much blowback from it.
Any other questions? I have one. What is your writing process like? Do you have a specific process, or what does it look like?
It varies. I mean, it's pretty, I'm a morning person, so I like to write in the morning. But, it can be, if I'm in the middle of something like this, I wrote this book in a bit of a frenzy. Sometimes I would write 7 pages in a day, which is bananas. Those were not particularly good days. I actually tried to stop myself sometimes because it was just like emotionally heavy to work on this project. But then, a lot of times after I'm done with a project, I'm like, I don't know what's next. And then, so then there's this kind of like, I guess something will, something will happen. And it always does, but I always think that it won't. That's TBA.
And then what made you make the switch from fiction writing to nonfiction writing?
It really was just something that I had always wanted to try and had tried. One of my discarded memoirs was like 400-page. I like to jokingly refer to it as my autobiography that no one asked for, Because I'm not really, I'm not like Eleanor Roosevelt. Nobody cares, like about the facts of my life. But there, had to kind of wait until there was a story to tell.
All right, last call for questions. Okay, we have a Prairie Lights table outside that is selling books, as well as the Merge bookstore or book sale just around all that construction. Betsy will also be available for autographs outside at the table. Please give me a hand in thanking her.
Thank you all for coming.